This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, extremely excited for this week's show. We have a ton of things to dig into with our guest this week, Thad Price. Thad is the CEO of Talroo, the award-winning talent attraction platform. With more than 17 years of experience in online recruiting and the job search vertical, Thad is recognized thought leader in the HR and TA space. He genuinely believes that there is no industry that plays a more integral role in the economy. Used his cross-functional experience to turn client feedback into innovative products that help companies hire better. Talroo is a disruptor, just like us Rebel HR practitioners. And prior to joining Talroo, he was the VP of Business Development at Job.com. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Kyle and Molly.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and taking some time out of your, I'm sure, extremely hectic schedule, trying to help people understand what in the world is going on and how do I solve this problem.
You got it. It is definitely a new world.
Absolutely. So we're going to dive into a number of things today. And, Molly and I are here, honestly coming from the standpoint of, okay, how do we solve this problem? So we're going to dive into that a little bit. But before we get into that, I want to ask, how did somebody with an economics degree get into the talent acquisition tech space?
That's a great question. Well, I will say that, by having an economics degree, you focus a lot on the labor market, and the labor market drives so much of the economy. So I think that was the stars aligned in focusing on, HR and talent acquisition. So I went to school in a small town in Virginia, Fredericksburg, Virginia, right outside of DC, graduated from University of Mary Washington. And there I started with the startup. And the idea, with that startup at the time, was building products to help job seekers find jobs more effectively and help employers recruit. And so my entire experience has been, in this industry of trying to ensure that we're, helping job seekers as much as possible. And of course, aligning with what's important for employers. And that's the right talent, right? And great people. I say it, so many times, in our walls, our virtual walls today, at Talroo is great people grow great companies. And I think it's that drives the economy. And when you help companies find great people, that's the heartbeat, and that's what drives revenue outcomes. And, as I've chatted with other practitioners in this space and leaders in this space over the last couple of years, what's exciting is this, this idea and this movement that we've been talking about for a number of years of, HR and talent acquisition being a revenue center versus a cost center. It's happening, folks. It's here, right? We've all been talking about it. If when you find the right people and you hire the right people, that drives business outcomes. And it's exciting that it's unfortunate it's taken a pandemic, but it's exciting that we're in this place today of really thinking about outcomes and thinking about the strategic function of talent acquisition in HR.
You mentioned it, but do you feel like that's what caused it, was the pandemic? Is that what drove it forward, or what else are you seeing?
Yeah. So early on, we've been seeing this kind of movement in thinking about talent as a strategic advantage in so many ways. And it's been my experience that, certain companies have different views on talent and the strategic focus that talent brings them. However, in the last 12 months, there hasn't been a boardroom across the U.S. or the world that hasn't been faced with making tough decisions around talent and recruiting. And I think there's this enlightenment that essentially has happened, and that is how important, talent and the right talent is for organizations. So I would say it started, and we've been seeing movement in that direction, and it's all accelerated when we're having to shorten our hours if we can't find the right talent we need. We're having to close stores or locations when we can't find the talent you need. That costs money. And I think that is this idea of, well, if I'm now not generating the revenue I was generating because I can't find the right talent. So I think I think there's this shift's been building. And I think that, this experience over the last few years has really kind of shifted a lot of thought process, and also job seeker behavior as well. What we're seeing from job seekers and what we survey from job seekers, pay is, of course, one of the key, components and key factors that a job seeker is looking at. But the second is flexibility. Mm-hmm. And as an organization, we have to have conversations with our leaders, tough conversations in some cases about, we may not be able to provide flexibility today, but what are we going to do tomorrow, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 24 months from now, to ensure we're, building the foundation for flexibility. And I think that, you're seeing that, and you continue to see that shift in what job seekers and team members want. And I think we have to address those factors.
And Kyle, I'm sure you can relate to this as well, but I think a lot of HR practitioners are like, yep, that flexibility piece, that makes a lot of sense if you are working in an office building on a computer 9 to 5. I don't care where you work, but there's so many of us that, like you had said, have retail stores or have, we're in manufacturing where we have to have people there to produce whatever we're producing. How do we bring that flexibility in our world where we have stores, we have hours that have to be attended? I can't figure that piece out.
That's a tough one. And you're absolutely right. I would say you almost have to treat this as an entirely different labor pool. A great example we're based in Austin, Texas, of course, and a company, one of the top grocery chains in Texas is H-E-B. Great brand, terrific experience. And I guess probably about 4 years ago now, H-E-B acquired a company in town called Favor. And Favor was an on-demand app that allowed anyone to just, bring you something, get something done for you, do a favor for me. And they purchased that company to basically create this on-demand experience for delivering groceries to, San Antonio and Austin residents and wherever H-E-B has a presence. And that was smart. And then they treated it as a separate labor pool. The tech stacks are different. The experience is different. And I think that's how we have to start thinking about this. I would encourage businesses to almost, try to A/B test different technologies and different services to try to reinvent what this looks like tomorrow, and what the future looks like for an individual business, because every business is different. Mm-hmm. But I think if you have this North Star of, we have to get to a point where people can have flexibility, I think first is getting that buy-in, and then trying to figure out, okay, how can we incubate a different process, that we could potentially use to be effective in the future to embrace the idea of flexibility. And I think a lot of the businesses that I've seen, another great example is Target. Target bought a company called Shipt a number of years ago. And Shipt was, an app that you use to deliver anything. And so Target had this great, could pull from this great talent pool of Shipt drivers, and they could stand up their own delivery service. So I think as businesses, we have to start thinking about what that looks like. And that's not easy. But I think strategically, as we move from this kind of tactical, I need to hire these people now, I need to get butts in the seat, which is a lot of what we do. We've got to really think about that strategic future and what that looks like and how we can embrace, what job seekers are really looking for. And if you can break through and embrace what job seekers are really looking for, you've created a great experience and you've created a way to widen your talent pool. Otherwise, may suffer.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, Hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting thought process, and I was just kind of thinking through, separating the talent pools and thinking differently. I mean, my the honest experience is the positions that I don't have specifically listed in a position, flexible work options, or potentially, some remote work available. There are some positions that are required to be face to face, but in my business, many of those are, those essential positions that, people are actually putting things together. I don't have flexibility, but in the positions that I do, I have to have it in there or I just won't get applicants, period. It's hard enough to get applicants for the positions I don't have that option for. So I'm trying not to make it harder on myself here.
Or even changing the work week. Like I've seen a lot of employers that are going full time is now 32 hours a week or, 3-4 days a week. So I think there's some things they can do with schedules as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I would think of this is that it all starts with your workplace culture. I mean, that's, regardless of flexibility and, all these features, that we think about and what we can offer talent, it all starts with, your company culture and that conversation around that. Because even if you do offer these things and you have a toxic culture, it's only a matter of time. And then of course you have a retention problem. It's tricky.
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, right? I distinctly remember earlier in my career, I was working for a company, actually one of the companies you already mentioned. But I had a great mentor, and I was complaining about a retail setting. I was complaining about I can't find people, and geez, it's just so hard. And this was 15 years ago, so things have changed, but. But he looked at me and he just asked me the right question, and he said, "What if you just kept the people that were quitting?" And it was like, oh yeah, that is the root cause here.
Oh yeah, I definitely think all HR professionals should be looking at, okay, how many individuals have I lost, even in the last year or even the last 2-3 years? Like you start looking at those numbers, it's like, oh, it's crazy.
And why?
Is this a staffing issue or is this a retention issue?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in a lot of cases, it's not money. It's more about, the outlook, it's about in some cases, the emotional connection. There are so many drivers of what it means. And I think, companies have to look at that. Companies have to ensure especially in this situation, we're doing right by having the right managers in place. The right team members in place, because, that's important, especially with new managers.
So one of the things I want to dig into, and I'm going to, for a guy with an economics degree and you also have a really interesting perspective on the labor market, because you're the one out there actually hearing what some of these job seekers want and helping companies kind of piece that all together. And it's been really interesting, in my seat to watch people who they will quit a job without having something lined up. And, that's a new, thing in the job market, at least in my experience. And so as you take this view and as you're looking at the labor market and understanding what these job seekers want, what are you seeing out there? What is kind of the prevailing market sentiment?
Yeah. So when we started looking at the labor market and dissecting what was happening and, why employers are having problems finding talent now, more than ever in many cases, there are a couple things that we're seeing. The first is in the last probably 12 to 24 months, we've seen a large amount of baby boomers simply retire, more than we have in the last, 3-4 years. And the reason is this kind of rational behavior of my house is worth more than it's ever been worth. My 401k is somewhat plentiful, and I'm just tired. I'm tired of having to deal with everything going on. And so I'm out, right? I'm out, and I'm going to reset my lifestyle if I need to, and I'm retired. And so that was the first kind of shock, I would say, that we've been seeing from a labor market perspective. And I will say, I don't think there's one of these things we can absolutely point to, but it's a lot of things that are acting together. And so I think that's one of them. The second is this idea that I was sharing earlier about flexibility. So if you think probably 4 to 5 years ago, there'd been a movement in the labor market for some, into some of the marketplaces. And what I mean by that, Uber and Lyft and, what's referred to is kind of the gig marketplaces were forming. And people were working when they wanted to work, and they can turn on the app when they wanted to work and turn off the app when they didn't want to work. And I'd been watching because I believe that there was this impact to a certain section of the labor market by these marketplaces. And so suddenly then you had the pandemic, where companies like DoorDash, Grubhub, I mentioned Favor in Texas, Instacart just had a surge in demand and changed how consumers behaved. I think of my mom and dad. They never used a delivery app before, but they haven't been to a grocery store now. They're in their mid-60s. They haven't been in a grocery store for almost 2 years now. And that's a forcing function that changed the way that buyers behave. With that means there's more orders coming through these marketplaces, and there needs to be labor to be able to support those orders and deliver those orders. By the way, in that situation as well, you're somewhat socially distancing through being your own boss, working through the app. Yes, you're going in to pick up food or orders, but it's definitely different than what those folks may have been doing otherwise, right? From a distancing perspective. So, if you think that the key for job seekers is I want flexibility, and now suddenly there's a lot more demand in these marketplaces to deliver goods and services, then you have a new way in which you're working. And, when you're thinking about those hourly roles, let's say, now you have a new competitor that maybe didn't exist before and is growing. And so I think that that's the second thing that is, that's creating, some challenges. And the third is just, I would say, all of the activity, the increase in demand, consumer demand, has just created an entire increase in jobs, and people have the power of choice, more choice than they've ever had. And I think those three, kind of three ideas are what's driving what we've been seeing from job seekers over the last probably 12 months.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, I'm thinking about the context of, the kind of the gig economy. If I just think about this personally, so my wife's job went fully remote in the midst of the pandemic. They actually closed the local office building. Well, they're not going to reopen that office building. They just saved a bunch of money. And oh, by the way, they saw, revenue and profits increase. So why in the world would they quit doing what was working? Right. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you as well that there's no way my wife's going back into an office right now. If they were to come back to her and say, you need to go back to an office, she'd be like, okay, I'll go work for the competitor that doesn't make anybody go back to the office. Right. And so it's the marketplace has just totally shifted. And, Molly, you are in the retail space, and you're certainly, I would say, competing with the gig economy. What have you seen?
Yeah, we've seen just that. We've seen a lot of people have a lot of choices. Our problem is we've been getting a ton of applicants, which I've heard from a lot of other people that's not the case. But we're also getting no-show to interviews, or people will say yes, and then they'll have, 10 different offers by the time we're through the interview process, and then they're taking other offers, and then we're competing, and it's a lot of moving pieces. So yes, we're seeing people are having choices, and we're also seeing our competitors offering huge sign-on bonuses, all these cool things, and we're just like, so we're constantly evaluating how we keep up.
I like to think of this idea of there's this idea of the clearing wage, which is the wage in which you need to pay in order to be effective with whatever else is out there in the market. And I like to think of that now as the clearing opportunity, because I think that the expectation of pay is still important on the minds of job seekers. But I think they've reset work-life balance, to be essentially more important in some cases than pay. Mm-hmm. And so I think this idea of clearing opportunity is like, what does the path look like? What type of flexibility will be provided to me? I think all of those things are now more important to job seekers than ever before. And I think that's just because of, what we've all experienced over the last few years.
For sure. And we've cut our hours down a little bit to provide some more of that balance, getting people out of there early as much as we can do in retail anyway. But we're also seeing where people have a set wage in their mind. And it's always the same wage. So I definitely know that's what's out there. Our challenge, we're commission based as well. So we have a base wage and then commission, and it creates a little bit harder challenge to get people to understand, especially if they've never worked off of commission, to like what their potential is. So at our level, we're almost selling an opportunity, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's a great segue, Molly, because I want to dig into something with you, Thad, and I know that you've done some content, and part of Talroo's focus is getting companies to think in this way. But how can we as recruiters start to think like marketers and start to capture the hearts and minds of these job seekers that have all the power and authority to make whatever decision they want as it relates to where they work?
Great question. I think there are a couple of strategies. The first strategy that I would say, more of a low tech strategy, is how quickly are you responding to your applicants? When we think about this, it's just applicants are like a sales and marketing lead today. And there have been a number of studies about when you leave a lead and you don't contact the lead as fast as possible, there's a deterioration of impact and value. I think I forgot what the actual number is, but there's an order of magnitude of ensuring that within the first couple hours when someone submits a sales lead, you're contacting them. The same should be for applicants, because, they have more choice than ever, and it becomes challenging. And that's challenging for a lot of recruiting teams out there because of everything else that's asked. And so it's a tall order, right? It's easier said than done. It's a tall order. And so I always encourage customers to think about little things like, can we beef up our autoresponder? Do we have an autoresponder on? Can we work with our IT teams to set an autoresponder to an email address where someone is applying? Are there ways that we can look at our competitors and, dig into maybe what job seekers are sharing on Glassdoor, for an example, and call those out in the autoresponder, just as like simple things. Like if someone is saying, this company doesn't have flexibility and you do offer flexibility, then you should call it out, because that people are, looking and making a lot of different choices, from a rational behavior standpoint, if we know it's important for people. So I would almost think of it as in sales and marketing, what you typically do is you build battle cards. And the battle cards are, is like a simple PowerPoint that, you just you look at your competitors and you basically you basically pair up your features with, their features so that you have some talking points. And I would encourage all companies to do that. I would encourage all companies to think about, okay, who am I competing for talent? And how can I have a focused effort around what's important? What am I learning? What can I gather? And how can I ensure that I'm selling those key pieces that my competitor may not be selling or may not be offering in those conversations indirectly? So, I think the idea of like talent battle cards and autoresponders and all these things that we can do to help connect with the candidates may be a way that is not adding another tech stack to the already complicated, talent acquisition suite. So those are two suggestions that I think that should be fairly easy to implement.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about it in the context of what we just talked about. So, we just talked about competing with the gig economy. And so I'm thinking about this. So, as an employer that, let's say I'm seeking for a retail worker, or I need somebody in person. But I can offer a little bit of flexibility, but I'm never going to be able to offer as much flexibility as DoorDash or Uber or whatever, right? You're just not going to compete on that. So, okay, I give up on that. So then is the focus then, okay, we have flexibility here, but here's the differentiation between us and DoorDash. Like, you actually get to work with coworkers. You actually get this connection to society or something along those lines.
You can be a manager. You can, there's upward mobility here, right? Yeah. All of those things that are important because, if someone is just looking for a transactional relationship, I'm not sure if that's, that may get you to a certain extent, but I think that a transactional relationship isn't necessarily what all companies want. I think companies want someone that is going to, someone that's going to dig in, build their career, aspire to be more than what they are and work hard to get there. And so I think the idea of creating, testimonials around folks that have maybe worked up in the organization is a great way, or a video with team members that have worked up in the organization is a great way to connect to the people. When I shared earlier about the clearing opportunity, to speak to that clearing opportunity. It's not all about money. It's not about all these other things. It's about what this company can offer you and how we make that happen.
Absolutely.
Battle cards. I love that idea.
We can do it, Molly.
Let's do it.
But it's a great example of something that sales and marketing teams traditionally, work together on, and how we need to think about that in talent acquisition. Because, if you think about the journey of a job seeker and you think about all the touch points that happen, it's so similar to a sales process and a marketing process. So think of marketing and sales. So, you generate a marketing qualified lead. Someone has been to a site and filled out a form, and your marketing team has now qualified that form and said, okay, this is someone that we should talk to. And so then the sales team talks to that lead, that individual. And then appointment is set, and through that, maybe an MSA is sent or a contract is sent, and the customer either buys or doesn't buy. Think of it with applicants. Someone submits their resume, they submit a form, they say, hey, they're raising their hand and say, I want to come work for you. Then either your technology or your recruiters are screening that lead, that applicant, and then you're setting a phone call to basically, chat about qualifications. Then you're working with the hiring manager. And then what happens is we either send an offer or we don't, and they either sign or they don't. And that's so similar to a sales and marketing experience. And that's why I think that there's, when you break it down, to that journey process that happens, I think there's a lot we can learn. And, I think there's a lot we can learn and how we can borrow things that are, appropriate for recruiting and appropriate for talent acquisition.
Well, you're speaking right to the heart of me. I mean, I don't know if Molly knows this, but my undergrad degree was in marketing. And I had nothing to do with HR. Like it was like, I tell people HR found me, right? Like it was like, which actually ended up, the person got fired and they're like, oh, you like people, you do this, right? You know, I'll go hire 90 people for the holidays, by the way. But for me, it was like that. That's the equation, right? It's like, oh, I just have to recruit, which means, it's just marketing. I have to, but the product is the job. And, you know, the customer is the job seeker. But you just have to make the right connection, right? So as we think about the kind of the sourcing, you know, is the sourcing of candidates, like where we actually post and the channels that we go through, is that actually secondary to the kind of the value proposition that we're putting in front of them, or how do you think about that?
The first thing I would say is we have to understand the job, right? And, you know, we like to think of it as there's the rec and there's the job advertisement. And I think these are very different in how we think about it. And, you know, the job advertisement is what tries to attract, you know, a candidate. And we raise our hands and say, hey, we're looking to hire someone. And candidates then raise their hand and they say, I want it to be me, because they apply and they research, and this journey happens. I think that there is an experience around a candidate looking at a job, then researching the company. And then once they're researching the company, then they're making the decision if I want to apply or not. And I think that is a big piece of it. But I would say to your question, when you think of, you know, primary versus secondary, I think, you know, what's the old, I guess is it garbage in, garbage out? And so, you know, if you're in a situation where your job ad isn't speaking to the benefits as much as possible of a company, and, you know, you're not being as transparent as you should be with the true value proposition of working for that company, then you're not going to have as much success advertising and attracting talent. And I always, you know, I share that it's important to be as transparent as possible in the job advertisement, because when you aren't, they're going to find out. They're going to do their homework. They're going to research. They're going to ask friends. They're going to, you know, try to research your company. So it's just important to just be as transparent as possible in the job ad. And then once you're in a situation where you feel like, okay, you know, Kyle, going back to your marketing days, this is my ad copy, right? So This is the ad copy that we want to showcase, and this is how we want to ensure that we're aligned. Then you can start kind of the idea of, all right, where am I going to source? And, you know, how do I invest in sourcing, and where do I go, and how do I make sure that it's efficient and it's effective for my recruitment marketing spend?
I think that's so right. And to circle back to where we began this conversation, you know, if that transparency isn't there and people don't have a realistic job preview and they've been sold something, for lack of a better term, and then they get there and it's not what they thought they were buying, guess what? They're not going to stick around very long. You've just tarnished your image and your integrity in their mind. And very, very well said. Mm-hmm. So that being said, like I think I said before I hit recording, we're not even going to scratch the surface on some of this stuff, because this is all like, I'm just totally nerding out right now. But you are the CEO of an extremely busy HR recruiting tech solution. So we are going to shift gears and go into the Rebel HR flash round. Question number 1, what is your favorite people book?
I would say my favorite people book as of late, or any
deal.
I would say probably I'm going to go with a time-honored classic, and that's 1 Minute Manager. So just a time-honored classic is one of the first books, you know, when I was managing folks that I read, and there are so many keys to that, you know, to that book that you can use in your everyday life. So it's a classic for me.
All right, perfect. I have actually not read that book, which I'm kind of ashamed to admit, but
it's good.
I got to put it on the list.
I've heard good things.
Question number 2, who should we be listening to?
Well, you know, as I said when we were talking earlier, we should all be listening to our partner, and that's always the case. Add a little humor to this conversation. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I think that an individual that I listen to a lot is Branson. And I do that, Richard Branson, because there's a good balance between performance, and I think there's a good balance between performance, humility, and an emotional connection. And from a leadership perspective, I think that's so important more today than ever. And the connection to the team members. So, I really think that that's, important. I'm reading another book right now, about, that was, a Netflix, based on Netflix. And I think the name of it is, I actually have it right here. No Rules, Rules Netflix. And, it's the idea of reinvention of Netflix, and, what happened when they moved from DVDs to streaming and what it is today, and, the focus on building a high performance culture. And I think that's really important, but you have to ensure the emotional connection to your team members when you're moving in that direction to a high performance culture, or you're moving fast, or you're leading the charge and you're focusing on innovation. It's so important to have that connection, because you can lose that. When you lose that connection to your team members, I think you lose a lot from a cultural perspective, an organization perspective. So, that's one of the reasons why I think he's an interesting character.
Plus the he's a space cowboy.
Right. That's pretty cool too.
Even for that, that's just super cool, right? I can't say that. All right. Last question. Want to make sure that our listeners can get connected and learn more about yourself and Talroo. So how can our listeners connect with you and learn more?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to, connect, ask questions. You can check us out at talroo.com. Happy to share more about our story. Or you can just send me an email at tprice, Price, at talroo.com. It's been great to be here this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. We will have all that information in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, click in, check it out. It's Talroo. It's TALROO .com. A bunch of great stuff on there. They do have a lot of solutions for some of the things we were talking about today. So I'll give you that final plug. Thad, thank you so much for spending some time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. And Rebel on, HR Rebels.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.